The veteran's last mission protecting a secret ranch that holds more than oil beneath its soil. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cold, misty morning in late autumn when Colonel Jack Caldwell received a call that would change the course of his life forever. The veteran had spent most of his years in the military, fighting in wars, surviving battles, and now, in his retirement, he was left with nothing but the silence of the world around him. He lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of the Montana wilderness, with only his loyal German shepherd, Max, for company. Life had slowed down for Jack, but that morning, the phone call shattered the quiet. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but not one Jack had expected to hear again. It was a former military contact, someone he had served with years ago, now running a private security firm. "Jack, I need your help," the voice said. "We've got a ranch, and something's off. We need someone with your skills to protect it. It's important." Jack wasn't sure what to think. He had walked away from his old life. He had no desire to go back into the world of danger and secrecy, but something about the tone in the man's voice struck a chord. Maybe it was the urgency, or perhaps it was the weight of a past that Jack could never quite shake off. His eyes glanced at Max, who was sitting by the window, his ears perked up, as if sensing the tension in the air. After a long pause, Jack finally agreed. He packed his things, told Max it was time to go, and set out toward the ranch. The drive took several hours, winding through dense forests and over snow-capped hills, until they finally reached the ranch's gates. The land was vast, stretching as far as the eye could see, with nothing but open fields, a few dilapidated barns, and a large farmhouse in the distance. But it was the silence that struck Jack the hardest. There was an eerie stillness in the air, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. As Jack and Max stepped out of the truck, they were greeted by a man named Tom, the ranch's caretaker. He was a tall, weathered man in his late 50s, with deep lines etched into his face. He had the look of someone who had seen too much in his life, but still managed to hold on to his sanity. "Colonel Caldwell, thank you for coming," Tom said, shaking Jack's hand. "We've been having some issues lately. Strange things are happening here, and I don't know who else to turn to." Jack nodded, his instincts already on high alert. "What kind of issues?" he asked. Tom's eyes shifted nervously as he glanced over his shoulder. "It's the land," he said quietly. "There's something beneath it. Something valuable, but dangerous. And there are people who are willing to do anything to get their hands on it." Jack's curiosity was piqued, but he knew better than to ask more. He had been in enough situations to know that sometimes, the less you knew, the better. For the time being, he decided to take Tom's word for it and focus on the task at hand, keeping the ranch safe. Little did Jack know, the true mystery was only beginning to unfold. "I've been here for a few hours now, and already the land seems different," Jack thought to himself as he stood near the edge of the sprawling ranch. His eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the sight of endless fields, rolling hills, and the dark silhouette of the farmhouse in the distance. He felt an odd sense of unease creeping over him, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. It wasn't just the isolation of the ranch or the wild beauty of the landscape. There was something deeper, something buried beneath the soil that Jack wasn't ready to confront yet. His mind returned to the conversation he had with Tom earlier, the ranch's caretaker. Tom had been strangely tight-lipped, revealing only fragments of the ranch's troubled past. "The land's been in the family for generations," he had said, his voice tinged with a sense of both pride and sorrow. "But recently, things have started to change. Not just the land, but the people around it. People are interested in what's beneath it. They'll stop at nothing to get it. I don't know who to trust anymore." Jack had been hired to protect the ranch, but the more he heard from Tom, the more he realized that the assignment was more than just guarding a piece of land. It was a mission to protect a secret, one that someone was willing to kill for. Tom had spoken of strange occurrences happening on the ranch. At first, Jack thought it might be nothing more than old superstitions or the ramblings of a man growing paranoid over time. But as Jack observed his surroundings, he began to sense that there was more to Tom's story. Max, his loyal German shepherd, had been acting strange since they arrived. The dog's normally calm demeanor had shifted. He was alert, his ears constantly flicking at every sound, his body tense as though he sensed something the human eye could not. Max led Jack to the edge of the property, where an overgrown patch of land met a dense forest. The trees here were older, their twisted roots gnarled into the earth, as if the very soil was alive, holding something within its depths. As Jack knelt to inspect the ground, he felt a subtle vibration. It wasn't just the usual tremors of the earth or the wind rustling through the trees. It was something deeper, something far more deliberate. Max whined softly beside him, his tail wagging nervously as he nudged Jack's hand with his nose. Jack's instincts, honed over years of combat, told him that something was wrong. This wasn't a normal ranch. There was a mystery here, one that had been buried for years, maybe even decades. He stood up slowly, looking around. The farmhouse was still in the distance, but there was no sign of movement, no sign of life. It was as if the ranch itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. A distant rumble of thunder echoed across the sky, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at Max, who was staring intently at something in the distance. "What is it, boy?" Jack muttered under his breath. Max's eyes were fixed on the old barn near the farmhouse, the one Tom had warned him about earlier. "Stay close," Jack said, his voice steady but low. They moved toward the barn, and as they got closer, the air grew thicker, as if the very atmosphere had changed. The barn itself looked worn and weathered, its wooden planks aged and cracked. But there was something about it that felt different, something that didn't belong. Jack's military training kicked in as he moved cautiously around the barn, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger. He spotted a set of rusty old tools scattered on the ground, a faded wheelbarrow, and a door that was slightly ajar. But it wasn't the tools or the barn that caught his attention. It was the faint glow coming from the small crack in the door. The soft light flickered like a candle, but it seemed out of place in the middle of the day. Jack motioned for Max to stay and approached the door, his hand resting lightly on the handle. He took a deep breath, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Stale air, dust, and something metallic. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw it, a hidden room. There was no mistaking it. This was no ordinary barn. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old, forgotten relics, photographs, faded maps, and strange objects that looked like they belonged to another time. But what caught Jack's attention was the floor. In the middle of the room was a large metal trapdoor, half hidden beneath a pile of old hay. The faint glow seemed to be coming from beneath it. Jack knelt down, running his fingers over the metal surface. There was something hidden here, something that had been concealed for a reason. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as he stood up and made the decision to open it. Max growled softly beside him, as if warning him to be cautious. Jack wasn't sure what he was about to uncover, but he knew one thing for sure. This ranch held a secret, and that secret was about to change everything. The sound of the trapdoor creaking echoed through the barn as Jack slowly pried it open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into the unknown. Max, his loyal German shepherd, stood by his side, his body tense, ears flicking at every tiny sound in the dark, abandoned barn. Jack could feel the weight of history, of secrets long buried, pressing against him as he descended into the darkness. The air grew cooler the farther he went down, and a faint smell of mildew lingered, as though the place hadn't seen the light of day for decades. At the bottom of the stairs, the small flickering light he had noticed earlier grew stronger, illuminating the walls of a hidden chamber. The room was smaller than he expected, but the walls were lined with old wooden crates and cabinets, each one covered in a thick layer of dust. There was a table in the center of the room, upon which lay several large, yellowed maps, and a few strange mechanical devices Jack couldn't immediately recognize. What caught his attention, however, was a large chest in the corner. It was old, made of dark wood, and reinforced with iron bands. Its surface was weathered, scratched, and marked by time, but it looked remarkably sturdy. Jack approached cautiously, Max following closely behind, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Jack ran his hand along the surface of the chest, feeling the intricate carvings etched into the wood. There was something almost mystical about it. He knelt down, inspecting the chest further, and noticed a small, rusted keyhole at the front. He had no key, but that didn't stop him. Using his military training, Jack began to work on the lock, his fingers moving with practiced precision. A few moments later, the lock clicked open, and the chest creaked as Jack slowly lifted the lid. Inside, it was filled with old papers, photographs, and what looked like pieces of machinery that had been carefully packed away. But it wasn't the contents that caught Jack's attention. It was the small, weathered journal that rested at the top of the pile, its cover faded but still legible. To the one who finds this, Jack read aloud softly, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. This is the story of what lies beneath our land. It has been hidden for centuries, and it is time for it to be found. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He flipped the journal open to the first page, where the handwriting was elegant but faded with age. The pages were filled with accounts of the land, stories of the original family who had owned the ranch, their wealth, and the strange happenings that had occurred over the years. The more Jack read, the more the pieces began to fall into place. The journal described a hidden treasure beneath the ranch, something more valuable than gold or oil. It spoke of a secret, an ancient artifact buried deep within the earth, hidden for protection and guarded by a series of intricate traps. According to the journal, the treasure had been placed there by the ranch's founders, who had discovered its power centuries ago. They had intended to keep it safe from those who would misuse it, but now, it seemed, the treasure was ready to be revealed. Jack's mind raced as he absorbed the information. This wasn't just a simple ranch, and it wasn't just about protecting the land. He had been called to protect something far more valuable, something that could change the world. But there were others who would stop at nothing to find this artifact, and Jack knew he wasn't the only one looking for it. As he closed the journal, his mind was filled with a sense of dread. Someone was already here, someone who knew about the treasure and would do anything to claim it. Jack's military instincts kicked in, and he stood up quickly, scanning the room for any sign of danger. Max growled low in his throat, his ears pricked, alert to something just out of Jack's sight. The silence was broken by a soft sound, a faint scraping noise coming from the stairs. Someone was coming down. Jack's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, his fingers closing around the cold metal of his gun. Max barked sharply, his growl turning into a warning. Jack moved swiftly to the side, staying out of sight as he waited for the intruder to appear. His heart raced as he held his breath, ready to face whatever came through that door. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and Jack could feel the tension building. This was no longer just about protecting a ranch. It was about protecting a secret that could change everything. And he was ready to do whatever it took to keep it safe. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the stone chamber beneath the barn. Jack's grip tightened around his sidearm, his senses on high alert. Max, his ever-loyal German shepherd, stood at his side, growling softly as his amber eyes fixed on the stairs. Whoever was coming down had no idea that Jack was already waiting for them. His mind raced through 1,000 scenarios. Was it a friend or foe? Tom, the ranch caretaker, had warned Jack that there were others interested in the land. People who would stop at nothing to find the treasure hidden beneath it. But Jack had a job to do. He had to protect the ranch, and whatever was buried deep within the soil. The sound of the footsteps stopped abruptly. Jack held his breath, waiting for the intruder to make their move. Max's growl grew louder, more pronounced. Jack's body was coiled, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. A shadow flickered at the top of the stairs, and then, a figure slowly appeared, stepping down into the dimly lit room. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by the low light. Jack's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize him. "Who are you?" Jack's voice was steady, but his finger was already on the trigger of his gun. The man froze, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the sight of Jack and Max. For a moment, there was only silence, heavy, tense silence. "Easy," the man said slowly, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just looking for something." Jack's instincts told him not to trust the man, but he kept his gun steady, pointing it toward the floor, for now. "What are you looking for?" Jack asked, his voice cold and calm. The man hesitated, then took a step forward. "I'm looking for the same thing you are," he said, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. "The treasure beneath this ranch. You don't think you're the only one, do you?" Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped that no one else knew about the hidden treasure, but it seemed he was wrong. You're after it too, huh? Jack said, narrowing his eyes. Who are you working for? The man smiled faintly, a look of amusement flashing in his eyes. I don't work for anyone. I work for myself, he said, his gaze flickering toward the chest Jack had just opened. But you're right. I'm here for the same thing. We're both looking for the same treasure. Jack studied him carefully, trying to gauge his intentions. The man didn't seem threatening, but there was something about him, something in his eyes, that Jack didn't trust. How do you know about it? Jack asked. You're not from around here. The man's smile faded slightly. I've been tracking this for a long time, he said. I knew there was something special about this ranch. Something that went beyond just oil or land. It's a key to something much bigger. Something that's been hidden for a reason. Jack's grip on his gun tightened. What exactly are you talking about? He demanded. The man's eyes flickered toward the chest again. I'm talking about power. The kind of power that can change everything. Oil is just the surface. There's something buried here that's far more valuable. And I'm going to find it, no matter what it takes. Jack stepped forward, his body tense. Not if I get to it first, he said, his voice low and determined. The man met his gaze, his expression unreadable. We'll see about that, he said cryptically. For a moment, there was a stillness between them, the tension thick in the air. Jack was ready to act, but something made him hesitate. There was something about this situation that didn't sit right. The man seemed too calm, too prepared. He was a threat, there was no doubt about that. But Jack knew he needed to be careful. Max, sensing the tension, growled again, his body low to the ground. The man's gaze shifted to the dog, and for a split second, Jack saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He didn't show it for long, but it was enough to make Jack wonder. The man wasn't as confident as he appeared. Jack took a deep breath and lowered his gun slightly, not completely lowering his guard, but allowing for a moment of calm. What do you want from me? Jack asked, his voice steady. The man studied him for a moment before answering. I want a partnership. You help me find the treasure, and I'll make sure you're rewarded, he said, his tone smooth, almost too smooth. We can do this together, or we can do this as enemies. But either way, I'm getting what's hidden here. Jack considered his words carefully. He had no intention of working with this man, but he wasn't stupid. He couldn't afford to make an enemy of him just yet. I don't work with anyone, Jack said flatly. And if you're smart, you'll leave now. I don't need a partner. And I don't need anyone trying to steal what's mine. The man's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. You'll regret this, he muttered, before turning and disappearing back up the stairs. Jack stayed still, his eyes watching the man's retreating figure. He knew this was just the beginning. Whoever this man was, he wasn't going away. And Jack had a feeling that the race for the treasure was only going to get more dangerous from here on out. Jack stood still in the dimly lit room, his gun still in hand, his mind racing with the conversation he had just had. The stranger had left, but his words lingered in the air, heavy with threat. Jack knew the man wasn't bluffing. The treasure beneath the ranch wasn't just a myth or a forgotten piece of history. It was real, and someone else was willing to kill to get it. The realization hit Jack hard. This was no longer just about protecting a piece of land. It was about protecting something far greater. Something that could change the course of history. The treasure had been hidden for a reason, and now, its secret was out. The question was, who else knew? As Jack stood there, the silence of the hidden room was almost suffocating. Max, ever vigilant, had returned to Jack's side, his eyes darting around the space, alert to any sign of danger. Jack reached down and patted the dog's head, grateful for his loyal companion. There was no one he trusted more. The old journal he had found in the chest still lay open on the table. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he needed were within its pages. He flipped it open again, skimming through the faded ink. The journal spoke of the ranch's founders, how they had discovered the artifact buried beneath the land, its power, and the decision to keep it hidden for future generations. They had sworn an oath to protect it at all costs. Jack's gaze moved over the page, his finger tracing the words. There was something about the way the journal was written that made him believe in the gravity of its contents. Whoever had hidden the treasure had done so with great care, and the artifacts in the chest were part of the plan to protect it. Jack closed the journal and stood up, his mind made up. He couldn't let the treasure fall into the wrong hands. Not after everything he had fought for in his life. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had no idea who the man was that had approached him earlier, but he wasn't the only one who knew about the ranch. Jack had seen the look in the stranger's eyes. The look of a man who was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. That was the part that worried Jack the most. There was something about the stranger that didn't sit right. His calm demeanor, his calculated movements, it all felt like part of a plan. A plan that Jack was not prepared for. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Jack turned to Max, who was still watching him with an intensity that Jack had come to understand over the years. The dog knew something was off too. "We're not done yet, boy," Jack muttered, looking toward the stairs that led back up to the barn. He needed to find out more about the people who were after the treasure. He needed to know who else was involved and what they were willing to do to get it. The only way to do that was to stay one step ahead. Jack grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder. He knew the ranch's landscape better than anyone, but the deeper he went into the mystery, the more he realized that there was a lot he didn't know. And that was dangerous. The barn above creaked as he climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the stillness. As he reached the top, he noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Jack paused for a moment, listening. No sounds. Nothing. He pushed the door open cautiously, stepping out into the cold, crisp air of the ranch. The sky was overcast, with dark clouds swirling in the distance. A storm was coming. Jack moved swiftly, his boots crunching in the dirt as he made his way toward the farmhouse. He needed to talk to Tom again, but this time, he would ask the right questions. He would get to the truth. The farmhouse was just ahead, a shadow against the sprawling fields. Jack's mind raced with possibilities. He knew Tom had been hiding something. But what? Jack had seen enough in his time to know that people always had secrets. And secrets, when they were buried deep enough, could destroy lives. As Jack approached the farmhouse, he heard a faint noise, something behind him. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Nothing. The wind howled through the trees, and for a moment, Jack felt like he was being watched. The feeling was brief, but it was enough to make his heart rate spike. He wasn't alone here. Not anymore. Jack quickly turned back toward the farmhouse, determined to confront Tom. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Tom was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, but his eyes were distant, as if he were lost in thought. "Tom," Jack said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Tom looked up, his face pale. "About what?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Jack's eyes narrowed. "About the treasure beneath this ranch. About who's looking for it." Tom's expression faltered for just a second before he composed himself. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jack knew that wasn't true. "I know you do," he said, his voice firm. "And I know you're involved." Tom's eyes flickered with fear, but he didn't answer. Jack stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "Tell me everything," he said. "Tell me who else is looking for it, and why it's so important." Tom opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. For a moment, there was silence, then a knock at the door. Jack froze. The knock was slow, deliberate. Someone else was here. Someone who wasn't Tom. Someone who knew what Jack had just uncovered. Jack froze when the knock echoed through the farmhouse. It wasn't the soft, casual knock of a visitor. It was deliberate, heavy, the kind of knock that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. He looked at Tom, whose face had gone even paler. "Who's that?" Jack asked, his voice low and controlled. Tom opened his mouth, then closed it again. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes flicking to the door and then back to Jack. "I don't know," Tom said quietly, but Jack could tell it wasn't the truth. Jack didn't trust him, not anymore. He stepped toward the door, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. As he approached the door, the knocking stopped. The silence was suffocating. Max, always alert, growled low in his throat, his body tense, his ears pointed forward. Jack stood still for a moment, listening. He didn't know who was on the other side of that door, but he could feel that something was off. He turned the handle slowly and opened the door, half expecting an ambush. But there was no one standing on the porch. The only thing Jack saw was an envelope, lying on the ground, the faintest trace of rain still clinging to the paper. He picked it up cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of movement. There was nothing. The ranch was as quiet as it had been when he first arrived, too quiet. He opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the letter inside. It was written in bold, blocky handwriting. "Asterisk, if you want to find the treasure, you'll need to act fast." The others are already on their way. Come to the old mine by midnight. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The mine. He remembered it from the old journal, the place where the founders had hidden the treasure. But why had they chosen that specific location? And why now? Jack folded the letter and turned back toward Tom, who had stood up, his face grim. Do you know anything about this? Jack asked, holding up the letter. Tom's eyes widened slightly, and Jack saw a flicker of fear. He shook his head. I've never seen that before, Tom said, his voice shaky. Jack didn't believe him. You're lying, Jack said, his voice hard. I know you're involved in this, Tom. You've been hiding something from me, and I want to know what it is. Tom seemed to shrink under Jack's gaze, his shoulders slumping. It's not what you think, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't want you to get involved. But it's too late now. The people who are after this treasure, they're dangerous. They'll do anything to get it. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Who are they? He demanded. And what exactly are we dealing with here? Tom took a deep breath, his hands trembling. The ones looking for the treasure, they're not just criminals. They're part of something bigger, something that's been going on for years. The treasure beneath this ranch, it's not just a pile of gold or jewels. It's an artifact, a relic with power. Jack's brow furrowed. In confusion. What kind of power? He asked, his voice tense. Tom glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. He lowered his voice. It's said to have the ability to change the course of history, to give whoever possesses it unimaginable influence. The founders of this ranch, they realized what it could do, and they decided to keep it hidden, to protect it from those who would use it for their own gain. Jack's mind raced. The more Tom spoke, the more questions piled up. If this was true, the stakes were higher than Jack could have ever imagined. So what now? Jack asked. Do we go after it before they do? Tom hesitated. We have no choice. If they get to the mine first, everything will change. We have to stop them. Jack's instincts kicked in. He had no time to waste. The others were already on their way to the mine. Jack needed to move fast, but he couldn't do it alone. Get your things, Jack said to Tom, his voice decisive. We're heading to the mine. And this time, you're coming with me. Tom nodded, though his face was pale and his movements slow, as if weighed down by a deep sense of dread. Jack could see the fear in his eyes, and he couldn't blame him. Whatever they were about to face, it was not going to be easy. But Jack had no choice. He had come this far, and he couldn't back down now. As they made their way to the door, Max trotted ahead, his nose twitching, as if sensing the danger that was closing in on them. Jack looked down at his dog, his loyal companion, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, he felt a sense of certainty. They were walking into the unknown, but Jack was ready to face whatever came next. The mine was just ahead. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the promise of a confrontation that would change everything. Jack took a deep breath and stepped out into the night, ready for what lay ahead. The wind howled through the trees as Jack and Tom made their way across the ranch, the night growing colder with every step. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the land, but it wasn't the moon that had Jack on edge. It was the fact that they were walking straight into the heart of danger. Every instinct told him that they were being watched, but there was no one in sight. Max trotted ahead, his nose to the ground, alert as always, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there in the darkness. The mine was only a few miles away, but Jack felt as though time was slipping away with every passing second. Tom, who had been walking silently beside him, finally spoke, his voice strained. You really think they'll be there? He asked. Jack glanced at him, his face hard. They'll be there. And when they are, we have to be ready, he said, his tone firm. Tom nodded, though Jack could see the unease in his eyes. Jack didn't blame him. They were about to confront people who had been after this treasure for years, and those people would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. As they approached the edge of the forest, the trees began to thin out, and the outlines of the mine came into view. The structure was old, made of dark stone, and it seemed almost swallowed up by the land itself, as if it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Jack stopped for a moment, scanning the area. There were no lights, no signs of movement. It was just the mine and the vast expanse of wilderness surrounding it. He motioned for Tom to follow, and together they made their way toward the entrance. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping sharply as they stepped inside the cave-like entrance of the mine. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they descended deeper into the earth, the dim light of their flashlights barely cutting through the thick darkness. The walls of the mine were rough and uneven, the ground beneath their feet uneven and slippery. Max stayed close to Jack's side, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Every step they took echoed through the mine, and Jack felt the weight of the centuries of history pressing down on him. This was it. The place where the treasure had been hidden, the place where everything would come to a head. As they ventured further, Jack's mind raced. He could feel the weight of the artifact beneath the soil, the power it held, and the danger it posed. Whoever controlled it could change everything. Jack had no idea what it could do, but he knew it was something that could not fall into the wrong hands. Suddenly, a low, gravelly voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come here, Jack." Jack froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. The voice came from the shadows, but Jack could make out a figure stepping into the light. Tall, lean, and dressed in dark clothing. It was the stranger from earlier, the one who had approached him at the ranch. His eyes gleamed with something dark and dangerous. "I warned you," the man continued, his voice low and menacing. "Now it's too late." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had known this moment was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for the danger standing before him. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Jack said, his voice steady. "This isn't just about a treasure. It's about protecting the world from the chaos that this thing can cause." The man smirked, his eyes narrowing. "You're wrong," he said, stepping closer. "This isn't about protecting the world. It's about taking control of it. And you, Jack, are in the way." Jack's mind raced as he stepped back, his hand never leaving his gun. He knew the man was right about one thing. It was too late to turn back. They were already here, and the stakes were higher than ever. "I'm not leaving without the artifact," Jack said, his voice cold. "And neither are you." The man's expression hardened, and for a moment, there was a tense silence between them. The air seemed to hum with an unspoken challenge, and Jack could feel the tension building, ready to snap. He wasn't alone in this fight, though. He had Tom, and he had Max together. They had a chance. "You think you can stop me?" the man scoffed. "You're out of your league, Jack." Jack didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Tom, signaling for him to stay back. He knew this was about to get ugly. The man wasn't alone, and Jack had no doubt that more people would be coming out of the shadows. As if on cue, two more figures emerged from the darkness, flanking the man. They were armed, their eyes scanning the mine for any signs of movement. Jack's grip tightened on his gun. This wasn't just a treasure hunt, it was a war. The stranger took another step toward Jack, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You're too late, Jack," he said, his voice cold. "The treasure will be ours, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." Jack felt the anger rise within him, but he kept his cool. He had been in situations like this before. He knew how to fight, how to survive. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, the fate of the world could hang in the balance. Jack stepped forward, his finger poised on the trigger. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice low and deadly. The man smirked again, but Jack could see the hesitation in his eyes. For the first time, the man was starting to realize that Jack was not someone to underestimate. The standoff had begun. The tension in the mine was palpable, the air thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. Jack stood his ground, eyes locked with the stranger and the two armed men now flanking him. The dim light of the flashlights flickered, casting long shadows against the jagged walls. Max, standing by Jack's side, growled low, his teeth bared, sensing the danger that was closing in. Jack knew this wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. He had already anticipated this moment, but the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. The treasure beneath this ranch wasn't just a historical artifact. It was a weapon, a source of power that could change everything. He couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. The man who had confronted him earlier sneered, his hand resting on the gun at his side. "You're wasting your time, Jack," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You'll never leave here with the treasure. It belongs to us now." Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. His fingers were steady on the grip of his gun, ready for whatever came next. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. There was a calm in the air, a silence that was more unnerving than the chaos that followed. "You're wrong," Jack said, his voice firm. "This isn't just about treasure. It's about control. You think you can use this for your own gain, but you're wrong. This power isn't something you can control. It's something that controls you. The stranger's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered, stepping forward with an almost casual confidence. That's where you're wrong, he said, his eyes narrowing. We know exactly what we're dealing with. The power of the treasure has been understood for centuries. The founders of this ranch knew it, and now, it's ours. Jack could see the conviction in the stranger's eyes, but he wasn't buying it. There was something else going on here, something deeper than just a hunt for treasure. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Jack said, his voice growing colder. You're playing with forces you can't control. You think this is just about treasure, but it's not. It's about power, and you're too blind to see that it can destroy everything. The stranger laughed, a dark, hollow sound that echoed through the mine. We've known about the power for years, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And we're ready to use it. You won't stop us. Jack's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop them, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. His eyes flicked toward Tom, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, his face pale and his hands trembling. Jack couldn't trust him completely, but for now, they were allies. Tom, Jack said, his voice sharp. Do you know how to get to the artifact? Tom hesitated, his eyes darting to the strangers, and then back to Jack. I don't know exactly where it is, he said quietly, but I know the way down. I've been here long enough to know the mine like the back of my hand. Jack nodded. We're going down there, he said. You're coming with me. Tom's eyes widened in fear, but he didn't argue. The stranger, meanwhile, watched them with a smirk, as if he already knew the outcome. You really think you can make it out of here alive? He asked, his voice low. We'll see about that, Jack replied, his grip tightening on his gun. The mine seemed to close in around them as they moved deeper into the cavern, the walls narrowing, the air growing thicker. Jack's footsteps echoed, and he could feel the presence of the strangers behind him. Max was close at his side, his body tense, ready to act at any moment. Tom led the way, his eyes flicking nervously as he led them further into the heart of the mine. The walls around them were rough, the floor uneven and slippery with age. The sound of dripping water echoed, and Jack could feel the cool dampness seeping into his clothes, but he didn't care. His mind was focused solely on the task at hand. He had to get to the artifact before the strangers did, or it would be too late. The deeper they went, the more Jack could feel the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just about treasure, it was about preventing a catastrophe. It's just ahead, Tom whispered, his voice shaking. They had reached a narrow passage, the walls growing even closer, the air heavier. Jack could sense the danger mounting. As they rounded the corner, Jack's flashlight flickered, casting long shadows along the walls. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A massive stone door, ancient and imposing. The artifact was behind that door, and he had to get to it first. He moved quickly, his hand reaching for the door, but just as he was about to push it open, a voice stopped him. Going somewhere. The stranger's voice echoed through the mine, followed by the sound of footsteps. Jack spun around, his gun raised, but it was too late. The strangers had caught up, and now there was no way out. The stone door was massive, standing imposingly before Jack, and just as his hand was about to make contact with it, the voice of the stranger cut through the tension. Going somewhere. The words echoed in the narrow mine passage, sending a chill through Jack's spine. His hand froze on the door, and he spun around to face the strangers who had caught up with him. There they were, emerging from the shadows, two armed men, their eyes locked on him with cold, calculating stares. The stranger who had been speaking was leading them, and this time, his expression wasn't one of smugness. It was something darker. I think we've reached a point of no return, Jack, the stranger said, his voice smooth, almost casual. The treasure is ours. There's no need for any more resistance. Jack didn't lower his gun. He couldn't. He had to keep them at bay long enough to find a way through this, but it wasn't going to be easy. The air in the mine had grown thick, with tension, and Max, always the perceptive companion, was already on edge, his hackles raised and his body coiled to strike at the slightest command. Jack's eyes darted between the strangers, assessing his options. He could feel the weight of his gun in his hand, the steady pulse of adrenaline rushing through his veins. The situation had escalated quickly, and now, it wasn't just about protecting the ranch or the treasure, It was about survival. You don't get it, Jack said, his voice low and steady. This isn't about a treasure to be claimed. This is about preventing a disaster. You don't know what's down there, and if you're not careful, it's going to cost you everything. The stranger smirked. I think you're just trying to talk your way out of this, Jack. But it's too late for that. We're here, and the artifact will be ours. You and your dog are just in the way. Jack clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the gun. He could feel the strain, but he had to remain calm. One wrong move, and it would be over for them. The stranger took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Jack. You really think you can stop us? This isn't just a treasure hunt, Jack. This is power, real power. You're out of your league. Jack's mind raced. Power. That was the key word, wasn't it? That's what they were all after. But it wasn't just power in the traditional sense. The artifact they sought wasn't just a relic. It was something that could change the very fabric of the world. Something that could tip the balance. And Jack wasn't about to let these men control that power. The stakes had grown beyond just protecting a ranch. It was now a fight to keep the world from spiraling into chaos. I don't care about power, Jack said, his voice unwavering. I care about stopping the wrong hands from getting it. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen. The stranger's face twisted into a scowl, his patience wearing thin. Enough talk, he growled. Get out of the way. With a sudden movement, one of the armed men lunged forward, aiming to disarm Jack. But Jack was faster. He sidestepped and shot a warning shot into the air, the loud crack of the gun echoing through the mine like a thunderclap. Max barked, and the two strangers hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Jack to react. He lunged toward the stone door, forcing it open. But as soon as it creaked, the walls around them seemed to shake, a low rumble vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. It's here, Jack muttered to himself. He couldn't wait any longer. The treasure wasn't just buried. It was alive, pulsing with an energy that was both magnetic and terrifying. Jack pushed the door open further, stepping into the darkness beyond. The strangers hesitated, but they were determined to follow. You can't stop us, Jack, the stranger called out as Jack entered the hidden chamber. We'll find it. You're already too late. But Jack didn't turn around. He didn't need to hear their threats anymore. They were after something they didn't understand. Jack had read enough of the journal to know that if the wrong hands touched the artifact, the world would change forever, and not for the better. The passage ahead was narrow, winding deeper into the earth. Jack moved cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the blackness. Max stayed close, his body tense, ready to act at a moment's notice. The walls around them seemed to close in, the air growing thick with the scent of ancient dust and stone. As they descended, Jack's mind raced. What was waiting for them at the end of this? The artifact? Or something worse? Every step felt like a race against time. Jack had to get to the artifact first. He had to prevent the strangers from reaching it. He knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. The passage opened into a large, cavernous chamber, its ceiling rising high above. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it, glowing faintly, was the artifact. The light was ethereal, casting an eerie glow over the room. Jack stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. But before he could reach it, a voice called out from behind him. It's over, Jack. The stranger's voice was like a blade slicing through the tension. Jack spun around to face him, the stranger standing at the entrance of the chamber with his men. The showdown was inevitable. The only question now was who would claim the power of the artifact, and who would walk away from this place alive. The chamber felt impossibly still, as Jack faced the stranger and his two armed men. The faint glow from the artifact on the stone pedestal pulsed gently, as if responding to the rising tension in the room. Max stood rigid by Jack's side, the low growl rumbling in his chest echoing softly through the cavern. Tom lingered several steps behind Jack, pale and trembling, but unable to look away from the confrontation. The stranger took one slow step into the chamber, his boots scraping against the ancient floor. The smug confidence he had displayed earlier had returned, but now there was a hint of hunger in his eyes, a wild gleam that told Jack the artifact was already affecting him. You see it, don't you, Jack? The stranger said, his voice almost reverent. The power waiting right there. It calls to those who are worthy. Jack steadied his stance, raising his gun just enough to make the message clear. You have no idea what that thing can do, Jack warned. You're letting greed blind you. This isn't a prize. It's a curse. And the ones who buried it knew that. The stranger laughed softly, shaking his head as if Jack were a foolish child. A curse? No, he said. It is potential. Influence. Control. And I intend to claim it. He motioned to his men, who stepped forward, guns raised. Jack's pulse quickened as he scanned the room. There was no cover, no easy escape. The cavern was a vast hollow bowl, and every path in or out was blocked by the strangers. If a fight broke out here, Jack knew the advantage would not be his. The stranger began moving toward the pedestal, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Jack moved with him, circling cautiously, keeping himself between the stranger and the artifact. The air in the chamber grew heavier, the faint hum of the artifact growing louder, almost like a heartbeat. Max barked sharply, sensing the shift. The stranger paused, glaring at the dog. "Move aside, Jack," the stranger growled. "This is your last chance." "I'm not moving," Jack said. "And neither is the artifact." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "Then you leave me no choice." He nodded to one of his men, who took aim. Before the man could act, Max leapt forward with a ferocity Jack hadn't seen in years. The dog lunged at the man's arm, knocking him off balance, his gun clattering to the floor. The sudden chaos broke the standoff. Jack seized the moment and rushed toward the pedestal, hoping to secure the artifact before the others could react. But as he reached the pedestal and looked down, he hesitated. The artifact was not what he had expected. It wasn't a weapon or a piece of gold. It was a stone, smooth, luminous, etched with symbols that seemed to shift as he looked at them. The light inside it pulsed like a living thing. Jack reached out instinctively, but the air around the stone felt charged, almost alive. A warmth radiated from it, spreading through the chamber. Behind him, the stranger shouted, "Do not touch it." Jack spun to see the stranger lunging forward, desperate to reach the pedestal first. His remaining armed man fired a warning shot into the air, the sound cracking violently against the stone walls. Tom ducked, terrified, pressing himself against the cavern wall. The force of the gunshot caused dust and small rocks to rain down from the ceiling. Jack knew he had only seconds before everything collapsed into chaos. He steadied his breath and reached for the artifact. The moment his fingertips grazed the surface, a surge of heat shot through his arm, racing through his body like electricity. Jack staggered back, gasping. The cavern rumbled deeply, the sound rolling like thunder beneath their feet. "What did you do?" Tom cried, clutching his head in fear. "It is waking up," the stranger whispered in awe. "After all these years, it feels us." The glow intensified, illuminating the entire chamber in a warm, eerie light. The strangers shielded their eyes, but Jack felt drawn to the glow, sensing something ancient, something that had been waiting for generations. Max whined, pressing close to Jack's leg, but even the dog did not retreat. Jack knew then that this was the moment the founders had feared. The artifact's power was awakening, responding to their presence, reacting to the conflict and greed in the room. The stranger, driven by desperation, charged toward the pedestal. Jack stepped forward, but the ground beneath them trembled violently, causing everyone to lose their footing. The stranger stumbled, landing hard on the stone floor. A crack formed beneath him, spreading outward in a jagged line toward the pedestal. The cavern groaned like a living creature in pain. "We need to get out of here," Tom screamed. Jack grabbed the artifact, lifting it from the pedestal. The heat burned through his palms, but he held on, gritting his teeth. As he lifted the stone, the chamber shook harder, dust falling in sheets from the ceiling. The strangers scrambled, their confidence shattered. One of them bolted for the exit, leaving his companions behind. The stranger reached out toward Jack, his voice breaking with fury. "Give it to me. It belongs to me." But Jack didn't listen. With Max at his side, the artifact burning in his hands, and the cavern collapsing around them, Jack made his choice. He turned toward the tunnel, and he ran. The cavern continued to rumble as Jack sprinted through the dark, the artifact clutched tightly in his hands. Max was right beside him, his paws pounding against the stone floor as they navigated the narrow passage. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, vibrating in sync with the chaos they had just unleashed. Behind them, the mine was collapsing, the sound of cracking stone and falling debris echoing like a distant thunderstorm. The strangers were still shouting, But Jack couldn't afford to look back. His focus was solely on getting out alive and keeping the artifact out of their hands. Every step felt like a race against time. The glow of the artifact in Jack's hands flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as they ran. He could feel its power, warm and almost electric, as if it was alive, responding to his touch. It was no longer just a stone. It was something much greater, something ancient and dangerous. Jack knew the only way to stop it from falling into the wrong hands was to get it out of the mine. He couldn't let the stranger's obsession with power destroy everything. Max barked, and Jack barely registered the sound before he heard the crack of a falling boulder from behind them. The entrance to the chamber had been blocked off, trapping the strangers inside. The mine had become their tomb. Jack pushed forward, urging Max to keep up. They reached the narrow exit, but as Jack turned to look ahead, he saw the glimmer of light from outside the mine. They were close, but the narrow path between the rocks was treacherous. They had to climb. Without hesitation, Jack started up the jagged rocks, his fingers digging into the cold stone as he hoisted himself higher. Max scrambled up behind him, his claws scraping against the surface, the sound echoing in the still air. Jack's muscles burned from the exertion, but he pushed on, determined. Just as they reached the top, a loud shout broke through the night air. The stranger had managed to catch up. "You can't run from this, Jack," he called out, his voice carried by the wind. "You think you can just steal it and walk away? The world needs this power, and I won't let you take it from me." Jack didn't slow down. He didn't turn around. He just kept climbing. The ground beneath him gave way as he reached the final ledge, and with one last effort, he hauled himself to safety. Max followed closely behind, and together, they stood at the top of the cliff, staring down at the mine that had once seemed like a place of secrets and promises. Now, it was nothing more than a ruin. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He could still feel the heat from the artifact in his hands, and for the first time, he allowed himself to glance down at it. The glow had dimmed slightly, but it still pulsed with energy, as though it was waiting for something. Jack knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The stranger wouldn't give up that easily, and the treasure was only part of the story. There was more at play here, something deeper and more dangerous than they had realized. Jack had to protect it, protect the world from what it could do. But as he looked around, taking in the vast wilderness surrounding him, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The danger wasn't over. They were just at the beginning of something far greater. The sky above them was a deep shade of blue, and the wind was picking up, carrying the scent of earth and stone. Jack turned to Max, who stood at his side, ears perked and eyes focused on something in the distance. Jack followed the dog's gaze, his heart tightening as he saw a shadow move across the horizon. The stranger was out there, somewhere. Jack could feel it. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. And now, with the artifact in his hands, Jack had no choice but to confront whatever came next. He looked down at Max, who was still watching the horizon, as if he already knew the battle ahead. Jack knew he couldn't do this alone, but together, they could face whatever was coming. With the artifact in his grasp and Max at his side, Jack set off, determined to protect the world from the power he had uncovered. But in the back of his mind, one question lingered. Who else was hunting for the treasure? The wind howled as Jack and Max made their way through the dense forest, the moon casting a cold, silver light across the wilderness. Jack could feel the weight of the artifact in his hands, its power still pulsing faintly, as if it were alive, waiting for something. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. The stranger was out there, somewhere, and Jack wasn't foolish enough to think that the chase was over. Not when they had both come so close to the treasure. The closer they got to safety, the more Jack could feel the pressure building. He could still hear the distant rumble of the mine's collapse behind them, the sounds of the earth shifting and settling. But it was the sense of being hunted that kept him on edge. Max, who had been unusually quiet since they'd left the mine, paused suddenly, his ears perked up, alert. Jack stopped too, his heart racing as he instinctively reached for his gun. The shadows around them seemed to stretch, the trees closing in. They weren't alone. Jack's eyes scanned the area, his muscles tensed, ready to react at any moment. And then he saw it, a figure, moving between the trees. Jack's hand tightened around the grip of his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. The figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing a tall, lean man with a weathered face and cold eyes. Jack's pulse quickened. It was the stranger from the mine. "You've made a mistake, Jack," the stranger said, his voice low, almost mocking. "You think you can run with the artifact and just walk away?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew the stranger's intentions all too well. He'd come for the artifact, and now he was ready to take it by force. The stranger's eyes flicked to Max, who was standing protectively at Jack's side. "You really think you can keep me from it?" he continued. "That dog won't save you, and neither will that gun." Jack's grip tightened around his weapon, but he didn't pull the trigger. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. "I'm not letting you have it," Jack said, his voice steady. "Not now, not ever." The stranger's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a pleasant one. "You don't understand, do you?" he said. "You're not the first person to try and protect this thing. But it's too powerful, too dangerous to be left alone. It belongs to us, Jack. It always has." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to decide who it belongs to," he said, his voice cold. "You don't know what that artifact can do. You're playing with fire, and you're going to burn." The stranger's smile faded, replaced by a look of contempt. "You're naive," he spat. "You're just a relic of the past, trying to fight a battle that's already been won." The tension in the air was palpable, and Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a fight for the artifact. It was a fight for control, for the future. Jack had already seen what could happen if the wrong people gained power. He wasn't going to let that happen again. He didn't know how much time they had, but he couldn't afford to waste any more of it. The ground beneath them shifted slightly, the tremors from the collapsing mine still reverberating through the earth. Jack took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the stranger. "If you want it, you'll have to take it from me," he said. The stranger's gaze darkened. "That can be arranged." Without warning, the stranger lunged toward Jack, his movements swift and calculated. Max reacted instantly, charging at the stranger, teeth bared. The two men collided, and the sound of struggle filled the air. Jack stumbled back, his heart racing as he watched the fight unfold. He couldn't let Max fight alone. In the chaos, Jack's mind was focused solely on the artifact, knowing that if the stranger got to it first, it would be over. Jack reached for the stone, his fingers brushing against the cool surface. As his hand made contact with it, a surge of energy shot through his arm. The power of the artifact coursed through him, its force almost overwhelming. But Jack held on, determined not to let go. He looked up just in time to see the stranger break free from Max's grip, his eyes wide with shock. "You don't know what you're doing," the stranger shouted. Jack didn't respond. He was too focused on the artifact, the power it held. It was alive, and it was pushing him to act. The artifact began to glow brighter, its energy intensifying. Jack could feel the air around him crackling, the tension in the atmosphere thickening. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. This was their last chance to stop the stranger from taking control. Jack took a deep breath and stepped back, raising the artifact above his head. In that moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. And then, with one final burst of energy, the artifact erupted in light, its power bursting free in a blinding flash. The explosion of light was blinding, and for a moment, everything around Jack seemed to disappear. The ground shook violently, and the air buzzed with an energy unlike anything he had ever felt. Max barked, startled, but Jack held on tight to the artifact, feeling its power surge through his hands. The light that had erupted from the stone enveloped him, and it felt as if time itself had slowed, the world outside becoming distant and muffled. Jack's heart raced as the light pulsed, its energy both overwhelming and calming, as if the artifact were trying to communicate with him. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He could feel the weight of centuries of history pressing down on him, the power of the artifact trying to reach into his very soul. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. Jack blinked, his vision adjusting to the dim, familiar darkness of the forest. The air around him was still, but there was something different now. The tension had lifted. Max stood beside him, his ears perked and his tail wagging cautiously, as if unsure of what had just happened. Jack looked around, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He expected to hear the distant echoes of the stranger's pursuit, the sound of more enemies approaching, but there was nothing. The forest was silent. No footsteps, no voices, No sounds of danger. Just the quiet hum of the night. Jack's mind was still reeling from the intensity of the moment, trying to process the overwhelming power he had just witnessed. He had no idea what the artifact had done or what its effects would be. All he knew was that it had been a pivotal moment, one that could change the course of everything. He looked down at the artifact, now still in his hands, its glow dimmed to a faint pulse. It was no longer the powerful, almost sentient object it had been moments before. It was just a stone now, its secrets hidden once again. But Jack knew it wasn't over. The stranger was still out there, somewhere, and the hunt for the artifact wasn't going to stop with one failure. Jack could feel the weight of that truth pressing on him. But for now, they had bought themselves time. "We're not done yet, boy," Jack muttered to Max, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. The dog looked up at him with understanding, as if sensing the journey ahead. Jack turned away from the artifact, pushing the lingering thoughts of power and danger aside. They had to keep moving. They had to stay ahead. Jack and Max made their way through the dense forest, the sounds of the night slowly returning to normal as they walked further into the wilderness. The cool night air was a sharp contrast to the searing heat they had just experienced, but it was welcome. Jack's mind continued to race as they walked, his thoughts shifting between the artifact, the stranger, and the larger question of what was truly at stake. The artifact was powerful, yes, but Jack had come to understand that the true danger wasn't in the object itself. It was in the greed and obsession it brought out in people. The stranger wasn't the only one after the artifact, and there would be others who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. Jack knew he couldn't keep running forever. He had to end this. He had to find a way to protect the world from the artifact's power, and he would do whatever it took to keep it safe. As they pushed forward, the night grew darker, the trees growing thicker around them. Jack felt the weight of the artifact once again, its pulse faint in his hands. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: this was far from over. The stranger might have failed in his pursuit, but Jack knew the forces after the artifact were relentless. Jack and Max were just beginning to realize the true extent of the journey ahead. They had made it this far, but the road was only getting started. With every step they took, Jack's resolve hardened. He would protect the artifact, no matter the cost. The future of the world might depend on it, and Jack would not let the power fall into the wrong hands again. The night stretched on, and Jack knew the real battle was still to come. But for now, all he could do was keep moving, keep fighting, and keep the artifact safe. Because in this war, the stakes were higher than ever. In this gripping tale of bravery and danger, a veteran embarks on a journey to protect a secret that could change the course of history. As the veteran navigates through treacherous obstacles, mysterious forces, and the pursuit of a powerful artifact, the stakes continue to rise, making for a captivating and thrilling adventure. Along the way, the veteran discovers the true cost of power and the responsibility that comes with guarding such a dangerous secret. With enemies closing in, the veteran must rely on all his training, instincts, and loyalty to keep the artifact safe and prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. This is one of the most intense veteran stories you will ever hear, filled with suspense, action, and an unforgettable quest for survival. As the veteran races against time, every decision counts, and the fate of the world may rest in his hands. The mystery surrounding the artifact intensifies as the veteran uncovers more clues, all while trying to stay one step ahead of those who will stop at nothing to claim its power. This is a must-listen for anyone who enjoys thrilling veteran stories filled with mystery and action. The depth of character, emotional stakes, and heart-pounding action make this an unforgettable experience. As the veteran fights to protect the artifact, he must confront not only external enemies, but also the internal battle between doing what's right and the lure of power. This story of survival, loyalty, and sacrifice is a perfect addition to any collection of veteran stories, showcasing the courage and resilience of those who fight for what's right. Don't miss this gripping adventure. Get ready for a veteran story that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end.